So today I want to talk about something that I actually believe that if you will do what we're going to talk about today, that it will, for some of you, it will actually save a friendship right now that is maybe like on its last thread. For others of you, it will be something that you will need in the future of your friendships at some point in time. If you're married in this place and you want to have a healthy, lasting marriage, you're definitely going to need to do this as well. But this advice isn't just for those who are married or single. It's for all of us. If we want to build meaningful community, we're going to have to do what we're talking about today. And the reality is that when I share what we're going to talk about, chances are all of us in this room are going to agree on one thing, that what we're talking about is good, we should pursue it, we should do it. It's like a really good ideal that we as human beings should strive for. But we'll also probably think to ourselves, it's a lot easier said than done. That what we're going to talk about today, we all agree is something good and true that we should pursue, and yet so few of us actually do that. And as a result of that, some of us have lost friendships unnecessarily. For others of us, it is the barrier between you experiencing shallow community and really rich and meaningful and deep community. So today I want to talk about something that all of us can do and must do if we want to build friendships, but it will be hard for us to do. Today I want to talk about forgiveness. I want to talk about forgiveness because I don't know if you will ever find the friendships and community that you're longing for, that you hope to experience, if you're not willing to forgive. In fact, I sort of believe that maybe one of the primary reasons that God didn't call us to do this life alone, that one of the reasons that God called us to do this life with one another is because it is in the context of friendship that we actually learn what it really means to forgive. That we learn about the power and necessity of forgiveness in our community. And so today I want to talk about it. How can we be a people who are known for our forgiveness? How do we extend forgiveness in our relationships and friendships? And to do that, I want to talk about first the progression of offense. And then I want to talk about the prison of offense. And then we'll end by talking about a path forward out of offense and into freedom. And I think we need to talk about this, especially we need to start talking about offense, because I don't know if you've noticed this, I bet you have, but it seems like everyone is offended, right? It sort of seems like everyone is on edge, that everyone is so easily offended. Am I the only one who've noticed that? I've seen it in the news, I've seen it in our communities, I've seen it in relationships. So I think we need to first and foremost talk about how easy it is for some of us to become offended. And it's not entirely your fault, right? Like, we live in a world full of outrage. We've sort of normalized outrage. We've normalized offense. A scandal goes viral in minutes. An angry tweet gets shared thousands of times. A person is caught in their worst moment, and it spreads everywhere in just moments. I mean, it is easier than ever in today's world to find bad news. You don't need to look very hard to find bad news. But it's not the same with good news, is it? Like, good news is somewhat harder to find. I mean, when was the last time you got a notification on your phone? Breaking, something good happened in the world, right? Boy Scout walks elderly woman across the street. Like we just don't get those sort of notifications, or they don't make it to the top of our news feeds. It's because we built an entire economy around rage. And because of this, I fear it made it so easy to be offended. I mean, there are moments where I feel like I need to pray and fast before I post anything on Instagram. Worried about who am I going to offend when I post this. For example, this is a totally silly example, but I recently started watching, pray for me, started watching this show that apparently has been popular for a few years, but I'm just now realizing it because I'm old. It's this show, The Summer I Turned Pretty. Does anybody? I'm pretty sure that show was created to scare every dad of a girl on the planet. But I'm watching this show, which I'm just like, this show is silly. Can anybody, I don't know if that's, some of you are offended that I said, so a couple of thank you, slow claps for that. I was thinking to myself, I was like, this show is so silly, but I'm like, this is probably what my parents thought when we were watching Dawson's Creek, and they're like, this show is trash. Anyways, so some of you are offended, right? And I was wanting to live post on Instagram stories as I'm watching this show, and I wanted to put something about, there's a character called Conrad, and I'm like, this guy's a joke. And I wanted to put it, and Jenna is like, you're going to have so many people with pitchforks at your door if you post that. That's just sort of the world we live in, right? Like we're really fragile. We get offended so easily, and I'm not like saying that judgmentally. Like I'm the same way. Another show, have you any fans of Parks and Rec? Right? Parks and Rec is like, I love that show. One of my favorite characters is Tom Haverford. And Tom Haverford in Parks and Rec, he has a list. He calls it his Dunzo list. And his Dunzo list is like if you've ever offended him or crossed him, you're Dunzo. And like his list just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we laugh and we're like, haha, that's kind of funny. But like it almost seems like people have their own Dunzo lists, right? And in the world we're living in, it's like you just do one thing wrong and you're Dunzo. Right? I see you post on Instagram about a story that I wasn't invited to, Dunzo. Right? Like you immediately text someone back after they text you, and then they don't respond, and you're like, I know you saw my text, Dunzo. Or you called me out on my behavior. You're so toxic, Dunzo. See, sometimes I just want to ask people, isn't it exhausting being so easily offended? Isn't it so tiring just being offended by anything and everything that doesn't go your way? See, I'm convinced that it will always be so hard for you to stay happy as long as it is so easy for you to get offended. And if I were to give you a key to happiness today, it would be if you want to make it easier to stay happy, become the type of person where it is harder for you to get offended. And here's the truth. You cannot have deep, lasting community if you live your life so easily being offended, because offense will drive you to isolation. And this is, again, why I believe God has called us not only to him, but also called us to one another. Because it's in the context of community that we really learn what it looks like to forgive. And so today I want to look at a teaching of Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, as we look at the progression of offense, and then we look at the prison of offense, and then we'll look at a pathway out of offense. I want to use Jesus' teaching in Matthew 5 as a little bit of a framework for us to understand what forgiveness looks like in our relationships. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to Matthew 5. If not, the scripture will be on the screen. Matthew 5, verse 21, it says, Jesus says this. He says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Probably not the scripture you're getting like crocheted on a pillow anytime soon, right? Like we love the teachings of Jesus that are light and fluffy and inspiring and motivating. This is one of those, though, that you maybe were hearing me read and you got a little bit uncomfortable. So you need to understand what is happening here with Jesus in Matthew 5. Matthew 5 is Jesus' longest sermon, known as the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus sort of mirrors Moses when he brings the 10 Commandments off of Mount Sinai. In that moment when Moses is bringing the 10 Commandments given to him by God to the nation of Israel, what is happening is God is teaching Israel how to become their own nation. They forgot who they were in Egypt, and so God is teaching them how to become a nation, his people. Now you have Jesus bringing a teaching called the Sermon on the Mount, again, on a mountainside, mirroring Moses. And it's not just that Jesus is trying to show Israel how to be a people again. He's actually showing all people what it looks like to be human again. And not human in the way that we in the world view humanity, but into an entirely new, full, beautiful humanity that God always created us to know and live. And so here in Matthew 5, Jesus is trying to tell us that your relationship with God and the health of your relationship with God is actually connected to your relationship with one another. When you have a healthy relationship with God, you will have healthy relationships with others. And when you have healthy relationships with others, it will affect the health of your relationship with God. And so Jesus here is teaching on these dynamics of what happens when you get angry with somebody, because it will happen. And Jesus starts this teaching and he says, you shall not murder. Now, chances are everyone listening to Jesus there, every Jewish man, woman, and child listening, they would have been very familiar with the you shall not murder commandment. It was one of the big 10, right? They would have been like, we heard this before. We know this commandment, thou shalt not murder. And you can imagine that his audience probably breathed out like a sigh of relief because they're like, oh, well, thank goodness, I haven't murdered anybody. So I guess like this isn't really applicable to me. But then Jesus does the most Jesus-y thing possible. He turns the tables on them. He's like, you've heard it said before, you shall not murder. And everyone's like, yep, heard it 1,000 times. And then Jesus is like, but I say, meaning I'm about to turn the tables on you. I'm about to disturb and disrupt your view of reality. And here's what Jesus says. Anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Whoever says to his brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Everyone say Raka. Now you got to say it with more aggression, right? Raka. Raka. It just sounds like a cuss word, doesn't it? Next time you stub your toe, just say Raka, right? But it's this Aramaic word, Raka, and it means in English, the English equivalent is idiot or worthless. So the big idea of Raka is more than like an attack on their intellect. It's actually an attack on the very worth of the person that you're talking about. The word Raka is pronounced with this hard, sort of throaty Raka, and the reason for that is it's meant to almost simulate the sound, not to be gross, but the sound of like hawking like some spit or a loogie. It's almost like you're spitting on the face of the person you're talking about, that they're just not even worthy of more than that. And Jesus says then, anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. I mean, like I said, this is one of those teachings of Jesus that maybe make us feel a little uneasy. It makes me feel uneasy when I read this. It says, Jesus is like, anyone who calls somebody a fool is in danger of the fire of hell. I'm like, Jesus, I have called people far worse while driving in San Francisco. Like, am I in the dangers of hell? What does this mean for my life? So if you're here and you're reading this and you're already like, oh, where are we going with this? Then you need to understand there's more going on. As usual with Jesus, you got to peel back the layers to understand what he's really talking about here. And then we understand with a bigger picture this invitation he's giving all of us. But first, Jesus in Matthew 5, he's actually explaining to us the progression of offense. And it starts with anger, right? In Matthew 5, it starts with anger. It starts with internal anger. Jesus acknowledges that this is where it all begins. Anger towards a person, anger, this simmering frustration with them. And if you don't address it, if you don't deal with it, if you just sort of be like, well, I'm just going to get over it, or you pretend it didn't happen, or you do what our culture has also normalized, you just ghost the person. Jesus is like, you can ghost them all you want, but until you deal with the anger in your heart, until you deal with that, it will never just stay there or eventually disappear. Jesus is telling us anger will always grow if you give it enough time. Anger will always grow in the dark and in the silence. And he tells us if it does grow, here's where it's going to go. It goes to external insults, raka, right? Jesus says at first you're angry, and then it progresses to external insults, raka, which maybe for us that's like starting with little jabs about the character of the person. Just little, maybe even passive-aggressive comments that you throw in there, sarcastic comments about them. Maybe it even goes into little like public mocking when they fail. You're like, well, could have told you that was coming, right? Until you eventually get to the last stage. Jesus says it starts with anger, and left alone, it will turn into external insults until eventually it turns into condemnation. And Jesus says when you call someone you fool, you're in dangers of the fires of hell. The word Jesus used here for fool, because you might be tempted to think that, again, this is an attack on their intellect, but it's actually far more. The word fool conveys the idea of total condemnation of a person. It's when you go, that person is beyond hope. Nothing will fix them. That you condemn them to their lowest moment. The idea of calling someone a fool is you playing the role of God and condemning that this person is beyond redemption. Jesus says this is the progress of offense. It always starts with anger. It's a real small spark. But when that spark is left unattended to, it grows. It becomes external insults, and left alone, it becomes total condemnation. And you see, the first point that Jesus is making here is abundantly clear. And that is that offense typically starts small, but it never stays small when it's unresolved. It starts with anger that boils under the surface until it seeps out through your words and eventually consumes the very identity of the person that you are angry at. And here's the frustrating part. The sort of unspoken truth of what Jesus is saying here in Matthew chapter 5 is Jesus is telling us that all of this is avoidable. Like this total condemnation of a person, the external insults, it was all avoidable. It didn't have to go there. Jesus doesn't seem to believe that we are just the victims of the progression of offense. Instead, Jesus seems to be telling us that all of us can decide whether or not we will surrender to the progression of offense and continue to go down its dark and wayward path, or we can stop it in its tracks and decide not to take a step further through forgiveness. See, what Jesus seems to be alluding to us, and this is going to maybe be for some of us hard to hear, what Jesus seems to be telling us is that while an offense is an event, being offended is a decision. While an offense is something you experience, you didn't want it, you didn't ask for it, you didn't like it, maybe even hurt you deeply, it is an event, and we're not ignoring it, we're not diminishing it, we're not justifying it. That's not what I'm talking about right now. But Jesus seems to believe that while the offense may very well be an event you experience, being offended is a decision that you make. Like, it's entirely up to you what you will do with the offense that you experience. I'm growing in this area as a parent. I'm really trying to work this language out of my vocabulary with Finley, my daughter, because there will be times that she offends me, right? There will be times she will do something that is an offense to me. And as a parent, early on especially, I would respond with, "You are making me so angry." And what I want to get out of my vocabulary is that statement. Finley can't make me angry because I am choosing what I will do with the offense that she has given me. It is up to me whether I will be offended. It is up to me whether I will become angry. It is up to me whether I will suspect the worst. Can I give you some marriage advice for those who are married or want to be married? If you want to actually have a healthy relationship, learn to suspect the best, not the worst. Like, learn to make your first move when they said something to you to be, instead of, "Oh, what a terrible person, how could they do that?" Maybe you think to yourself, "I bet they didn't mean it that way. I bet there's more going on right now." And by the way, I don't think that's just a marriage thing. I actually think that if you want to have actual lasting friendships, you're going to have to learn how to suspect the best, not the worst in people. In the scriptures, it says, "Those who look for evil find it, and those who look for good find it." When you suspect the worst, you'll find the worst in everybody. When you suspect the best, you'll begin to see the best in everybody. And it is so hard. I didn't say this first service, so this must be for someone's second service. It is hard to ever build a relationship of trust if you are always suspecting the worst. And it's hard to ever have a friendship that lasts if you don't even have a friendship that trusts. Are you with me? I mean, this is why Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, he's teaching new followers of Jesus how to be followers of Jesus. And he says, don't sin by letting anger control you. Uh-oh. There's Paul. He's not letting us take on the posture of a victim. He's like, no. Like, whether you let anger control you is entirely up to you. And he says, don't sin by letting anger control you. So Paul is actually saying, if you're here and you're like, I'm just going to be angry, I'm going to be bitter, I'm going to have malice in my heart, I'm going to talk bad about them, and you choose to do that. What Paul goes, he's doing more than just saying you're a little grumpy. He's actually saying, like, you're sinning. And what is sin according to the Bible? Sin according to the Bible, the very word picture of sin is you miss the mark. It's like an arrow aimed at a target, but it ends up way over here. So sin is when we miss the mark. And what does that mean? It means when we live beneath who God has created us to be. So Paul is saying, when you let anger control you, bitterness, suspicion control you, Paul is saying you begin to live underneath who you were created to be. Of course you are. No one has ever been like in a really good mood all the time, and you're like, what's your secret? And you're like, I'm bitter, right? I'm just angry. I just suspect the worst in everybody. Oh, man, it's such a great way to start my day. No one does that, right? Because when you choose bitterness and anger, you always find yourself living beneath the life you were created to live. And Paul, he goes on and says, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. For anger gives a foothold to the devil. Far too often, we only apply this to like married couples. Good advice. I think it applies to all relationships. Like, don't let anger control you. Reminds me of the quote from Thomas Watson. He once said this. He said, Satan loves the fish in the troubled waters of a wounded spirit. Satan loves to fish in the troubled waters of a wounded spirit. Have you ever heard the phrase, hurting people hurt people? Right? This is an echo of the same idea that when we allow our waters to be troubled through anger or malice or bitterness, we become a wounded person. And if you don't heal that wound, you might very well hurt others the same way you have been hurt. The oppressed can easily become the oppressor without healing. And so Paul says we got to let go of anger. Jesus says you got to stop anger in its tracks before it becomes condemnation. Because if you don't, that's where we move to the second part, that the progression of offense becomes a prison of offense. Jesus in Matthew 5, in this teaching, Jesus says to those who allow anger to grow into slander, then grow into condemnation, Jesus says you will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, what's Jesus talking about? Jesus uses the word for hell. The word he uses here is Gehenna. Everyone say Gehenna. Gehenna. It's the word Jesus used for hell. And at first glance, you might think that Jesus is talking about your eternal destination. Like if you're angry with anybody, you call anyone a fool, you're going straight to Satan's sauna after this life, right? Like that's not Satan's sauna, I don't know. Anyways, like that's not what Jesus is actually talking about at all. But what he is talking about is a very real place that everyone in his world, that first audience listening, they would be like, oh yeah, we know what Gehenna is. Because Gehenna wasn't a metaphor, it was a real place in Jerusalem. This valley, known as Gehenna, had a dark past. In the time of some of Israel's worst kings, Gehenna was a place used for pagan worship. People would go to Gehenna, and they would worship the false god Molech. And the way they would worship the false god Molech is that they would actually sacrifice children in this valley known as Gehenna. Eventually, it became sort of the Jerusalem garbage dump, where rotting garbage, burning refuse, and the stench of decay would fill the air. So when Jesus is like, if you allow anger to continue to progress to condemnation, and if you call someone a fool, meaning you are condemning them beyond hope, Jesus is like, you are in the dangers of the fire of hell, in the fires of Gehenna. Everyone would have known what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus is saying here is that when you allow yourself to become a place full of anger, where your relationships rot, and joy burns out, and trust disappears, and the stench of bitterness begins to permeate your life, Jesus is saying when we allow ourselves to continue to progress down the path of bitterness and anger, Jesus is saying your life becomes Gehenna. Your life becomes a living hell. And the thing about Gehenna was everyone could smell it from miles away, just like you can smell a bitter person from miles away. When you see them walk into the room and how they navigate relationships, you can tell, oh, you've been hurt. You have anger in your heart. Because Jesus is telling us something that we've all probably experienced personally and maybe even in our own communities, that when we allow bitterness to take root, our hearts become Gehenna. So the question is, how do we get out? Right? How do we move forward out of the prison of offense? And Jesus gives us a way out. In Matthew 5, 25 through 26, Jesus, he continues with this story. He says, when you're on the way to court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you will be thrown into prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you have paid the last penny. See, Jesus is warning us that if you do not resolve your offenses, if you do not take care of the bitterness in your heart, if you do not find a way to quench the flames of Gehenna in your heart, if you decide to let that anger boil over into slander and then into condemnation, Jesus says it will lead you to your own imprisonment. That if you allow anger to rule your heart, the irony is you're not even affecting the person you're angry at. They're living their life. You're not imprisoning them with your bitterness and rage. That'll show them. No, they're living their life. Jesus is saying the only person you are imprisoning with your anger, rage, and malice is you. Is you. And so Jesus says we need to get out of this prison before it's too late. Like, it's interesting, sometimes I'm interested how we phrase things. We're like, I'm holding a grudge. Jesus was like, it's impossible. You don't hold a grudge. A grudge holds you. It keeps you captive. Like the popular saying from the author Anne Lamott, she says, not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. The rat lives, and you're the only one who pays the price. So what do? Jesus' answer is simple. He says, if you are presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Jesus says the way out, the path out of the prison of offense, Jesus makes it really clear here. He says the path is forgiveness. The way to choke out the flame of anger burning in your heart is to douse it with forgiveness to the best of your abilities. And what's interesting about this is that Jesus doesn't even give us room to pray about it. Jesus seems to believe that when it comes to forgiving your enemies, this is not something you need to pray about. It's not like, well, God, should I do it? Should I not? Like, is this good for you? Jesus is like, don't pray, just go forgive. Do you know there are actually some things you don't need to pray about? You don't need to pray about if you should be a generous person, right? You should. You don't need to pray about whether you should stand with the oppressed or the marginalized among us. You absolutely should. These are not things that we need to pray and fast about. And forgiveness is also one of those things. When it comes to forgiving those who have wounded us and hurt us, Jesus says you need to go, and he not only says you need to go and forgive, notice Jesus says you need to go and do it quickly. Do it as fast as you possibly can, because that fire called anger has a way of burning so quick. And if you allow there to be too much time, it will become harder and harder to forgive. But what I find interesting is Jesus actually advises. He's like, if you're in the temple offering a sacrifice to God and you remember somebody's got an offense against you, you need to leave. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. Imagine you're in church today, right? That's like Jesus saying, if you're at Canvas and in the middle of Travis's sermon, you realize you have an offense against somebody, you need to stand up, you need to walk out, and you need to go and forgive them and then return. So if you stand up right now, we're all going to know what's up. But that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, Jesus seems to believe, or actually Jesus seems to be saying that he's actually more concerned, he's more concerned with the state of your heart than whether you sit in the church service. And he's actually seeming to tell us that your relational health is connected to your spiritual health, which of course Jesus would say that. Didn't he also say, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, strength? And then he said the next commandment is just as important, love your neighbor as yourself. We're the ones who have compartmentalized the two, that have made this sort of belief that, well, I can love God but hate people. Nope. Jesus is like, we can't say we love God and hate people. If we love God, we will love people, even those that would be easy to hate. What does it look like for us to forgive? Jesus says it's connected to your heart. It's connected to your spiritual health. Can I go as far as to say this? There's some of you're wondering why you're stuck in your faith. If I could be so bold, and maybe this applies to you, maybe it doesn't. But some of you are like, oh, I'm stuck in my faith. I can't break through. It feels like there's a wall. Maybe I need to go to a new church. Maybe I need to listen to more podcasts. Maybe you need to forgive whoever you're harboring bitterness against. Because maybe for some of you, if we're taking the words of Jesus seriously, what Jesus would say to some of you is, you have gone as far as you're going to go with me until you forgive. Because you don't get to say you love me while you harbor hatred and bitterness and malice and condemnation to somebody else. And so Jesus says, you want to grow in your faith? Grow in forgiveness. And if you're like, how does that even look, Travis, in this world that has normalized outrage? How do we live out this forgiveness? I have really good news. We have Jesus. Jesus is our North Star. He is our compass. And if you're like, what does it look like to forgive my enemy? Let us look to the one who hung on the cross, and while hanging on the cross, his accusers slandering his name, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If you're wondering what forgiveness looks like, look at how Jesus forgave others. If you're wondering what forgiveness looks like, look at how Jesus has forgiven you. And then go and do the same. This is what Paul talks about in Romans 5:10. He says, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son. That first line is important for you to understand. Paul didn't say, when you put yourself back together, when you proved you were really sorry, when you came and asked for forgiveness, then God loved you. What Paul tells us is, while we were still enemies, while we were still rebelling against God, while we were still rejecting God, while we were still running away from God, while we were still doing the very opposite that Jesus had called us to do, while we were still doing that, God reconciled us through Jesus' death on the cross. See, if you're like, how does it look to forgive? Look to Jesus. He is our compass forward. It's like C.S. Lewis said, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. Yeah. Forgiveness is hard. Forgiveness doesn't always come naturally, which is why we need a work of the Holy Spirit in our heart to get us to that place of forgiveness. If you could have done it through your own power, you would have done it by now. We need God to move in our hearts. God, would you shape our hearts to beat in rhythm with yours, to forgive others like you have forgiven me. Paul in Ephesians 4, he says, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. I think forgiveness is one of, if not the greatest metric of the true state of the maturity of your faith. You can quote scripture all day long and not be a very mature follower of Jesus. You can go to 10 Bible studies somehow in 7 days. You can go to church every Sunday. You can give. You can do all these things. I just think one of the truest tests of your faith is, will you forgive? And not just forgive those who are easy to forgive, but will you forgive your enemy? Will you forgive those who've hurt you, who've wounded you? And so this morning, maybe you're here, and if you're honest, there's been a spark of anger. Maybe it's recent, maybe it's not so recent, but that anger has grown into sort of slander of a person. You should be talking to that person, but instead you just talk about them. And maybe some of you, if you're honest, it's moved beyond slander. It's actually condemnation. Like you actually hope they fail. I hope they don't succeed. I hope if they were to fail, you would celebrate. Jesus is inviting us into a better way forward, a harder way forward. But I think we all can agree that if enough of us did this forgiveness thing, how much better would the world become? How much freer would you be? How much happier could you be? Lewis B. Smedes, he says this, forgiveness is unlocking the door to set someone free and realizing you were the prisoner. Some of us are in a prison cell of our own making. Your offender did not throw you in that cell and lock the door. You've placed yourself in there. You've shut the door, and the good news is the door opens from the inside. Jesus says you can open the door. You can walk out in freedom. But the path to freedom is called forgiveness. Can we pray?